Am I hearing that correctly? Yes, okay. Sorry, folks. Some breaking news here. We've had some reports of Holy Cross students playing Call of Duty and getting destroyed, throwing down their controllers in rage, and then, yes, okay, so throwing down the controllers in rage and saying, quote, screw this game, unquote. We're getting a response from their opponents, and here it is. We're going to put that up on screen for you.
Mr. Phelps's class. Yeah.
All right, good morning, everybody. So we're going to handle this a little bit like we did last Monday. So I've got one video that I'm going to show to everybody, and then I'll just show you, where to go in the video to find the section that applies to you. Makes it a little easier for me. So here's the timestamps for that.
Seniors.
Okay, good morning, seniors. So this is, as you'll notice, an independent reading project for the book trailer, but we're getting into the last assignment for these projects, and I know these have been a long haul, but y'all been doing great. I'm still in the process of going through assignment number 4, the final projects, and grading those, but the ones I've seen so far have been pretty impressive, so I appreciate everybody's enthusiasm with that. But let's take a look at this one here. I'm going to scroll down to assignment 5. And you'll notice that if you go and look at yours, they're all the same, okay? So I am going to make some changes, though, some very important changes, so please pay attention and make sure you get this correct. So assignment 5 is a reflection, and that is your opportunity just to think about the process that you took and do some metacognition about this project and the book reading in general. I've taken this piece, the reflection, and moved it over to Google Docs here so that I can make some modifications. So the reflection I'm turning into, instead of 2 pages, I'm turning into a 1 to 2 page document. This is MLA style, so double spaced. It should not be terribly challenging, and I really just want you to follow along with the prompt I'm giving you. So don't feel like you have to be too creative here, but I do want you to be thinking about these questions in detail and be honest with me. Right? There's no penalty for being honest. One big change I'm going to make is that I want you to ignore this part here. Most of you put a works cited page in with either assignment 3 or assignment 4. So I want you to remove that and just worry about the reflection. So no works cited page. The second thing I'm going to change is I'm going to make this Friday, March 27th. Okay, so that's due this upcoming Friday. Excuse me. The reason I want to do that is because you all have internship online somehow on Thursday. I'm not sure exactly what that's going to entail. But that way you can have some time to work on this, and that'll also incidentally give me time to get through all your projects and make sure that you get those grades back as well. So due Friday, just have it sometime in on Friday. I'm not going to give you time on Friday. I'm going to give you a no red ink on Friday. But you have that until, say, Friday when the day begins. So try to have that done between sometime Monday and Thursday to have it turned in on Friday sometime. All right. So 1 to 2 pages. Again, very very low stakes here. But let's go through this. The reflection is your opportunity to think about the processes you took to create your project. This is what I want you to include in your reflection. I want you to explain the process you took in detail. All right. So think about all the way back when you were like brainstorming what to do, through where you decided what to do and why you decided what you were going to do, and then the process of like producing that. Some of these were pretty big productions, so I want you to tell me all about that basically. Secondly, explain the obstacles you faced and how and if you overcame them. Sometimes, that was a technological thing. Sometimes that was a motivation thing. I'd like to hear about all that stuff. So again, you're not going to be penalized for telling me the truth. But think about the obstacles that you had to deal with. Reflect critically on your level of satisfaction. Like, how happy are you with your project? Explain what you would do differently if you had the chance to start over. And then explain what you're proud of on the other side of things. So hopefully this felt like a kind of new thing for you, or at least a stretch, or a revisiting of a skill that you haven't used in a while. So if that's the case, then this is a good time to talk about that and think about what you would do differently if you had the chance to do it again. Next, write about the rhetorical decisions you had to make to adapt your book to a technological medium. Explain how the experience was different for you compared to traditional essays or projects. So part of this, of course, was dealing with the technology. I wanted to see how you all would deal with that, and give you some exposure to not necessarily the technology, but more about like thinking about having to adapt rhetoric, and that's always, of course, important to me. So yeah, think about the rhetorical decisions you had to make that would look differently for you if you just had to write an essay. And then I'm going to remove this picture here so we can read this last one. Finally, reflect honestly. This is in addition to the one that you have in your OneNote. Excuse me. So reflect honestly about your level of effort with the entire project. Write about your successes or setbacks when you were reading your book or not reading it. Write about your level of effort or enthusiasm completing your final project. So I want to hear honestly, and it's fine again to be honest. I encourage it, and I want that. I want to know, did you read your book all the way through? Was this a successful thing for you? Did you feel like you gained anything from it? And it's okay to say no, but I want to hear why, right? Like, was it because you didn't find relevance in it, or was it because you didn't put enough effort into it? And thinking about that and reflecting honestly about it is going to be helpful for you. And it's just something I want to hear. Again, it won't change the grade. All right. So that is the goal. I'm going to give you today, Monday, and tomorrow, Tuesday, to work on that. You'll be off on Wednesday, and then on internship on Thursday, so you'll be off on your own. But you basically have the whole week to finish this. Okay, so pretty low stakes, and I'm much more interested on you just thinking about the process. So let me know if you need any help, and I'll be in contact with you as you need me. Thanks so much. Bye.
Juniors.
All right. Good morning, juniors. So this is, of course, the personal research project prompt that's in your OneNote already. We'll be kind of moving forward as I'm getting through the process of reading all of your literature review first drafts, and we're going to go ahead and start on the proposal. So that means that you're going to have to build some things around the proposal, around the literature review that you've already written to create your proposal, even though you know that probably there's going to be some revisions with that literature review. So I'm going to try to get those back to you either today or tomorrow, and once I do, you'll be able to also manipulate that. The goal with this is to have this completed by Friday, March 20. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. Friday, March 27th. So this upcoming Friday is the completed proposal that is due. Let me scroll up a little bit. The completed proposal is due, which includes all these pieces, which I'm going to explain right now. Okay. So if we look at the prompt right here where it says research proposal, it talks about a few things that we haven't really talked about. So the entire proposal consists of your research questions and your brief literature review, which again, both of those things should be already in your literature review draft. I had a good question too about, looking at the format of these. When do you put your research questions in? I've asked you to put those in at the end, and that's just because that's the way I want you to think about it. But honestly, I don't really care, and nobody else will either. The idea behind a research proposal and looking at the samples that I've given you is that they don't really have a traditional format, and it really depends on what you're doing with your research to know what you need to put in there. Some people need a methodology section with really heavy graph work and stuff, and you probably won't need that. It just depends on what your research project is. So there's no set format that you have to follow. These can look a lot of different ways. So ideally, these research questions and the literature review are already at least drafted out, which is what I'm going to give you some advice on to revise. The things that you have not yet done and not yet included in your proposal is a plan for completing the research, potential obstacles you expect to see, your expected findings from your primary research, and your anticipated final project. Now, I know that you probably haven't thought about this too much, but that's what the proposal is for. So it's time to think about that, where you think this research will end. And we talked about that briefly. There's some other examples down here in the final project section. But we talked about that briefly, thinking about where does this research have a natural end? Meaning that some of them are going to end in a paper, some of them are going to end more like a PowerPoint or a presentation, some of them are going to end more like a business plan or anything else like that, right? These can end up in a lot of different ways. So thinking about what you think that final project will be is going to be helpful here. Now, all these other sections that we haven't talked about, they're going to be put somewhere in this proposal around a logical place that makes sense around that literature review. And again, because the literature review is accounting for 80 to 90% of the entire proposal, all these sections are going to be pretty small. They may be a paragraph each, okay? So try not to freak out too much about adding this many things because it's really going to be pretty small ultimately. Let's take a look at my example that I have in OneNote. Let me see. Yeah. Okay, so this is, of course, mine, which, again, you don't have to follow my format, but this is just one I know really well. You'll also notice that I have an introduction. Most of you probably won't need this either, but if you decide like, hey, my literature review starts like hitting the ground running and I feel like I need another paragraph to explain that, or maybe you feel like the first paragraph of your literature review is already doing the job of an introduction, then you can pull out that paragraph and just make a quick introduction here to give that quick version of the education, quick version of the context, like why are we talking about this, to get to your literature review. So those are, again, optional. I'm not too terribly worried about if you have an introduction section, unless I think that you need it, unless the literature review makes it seem like it's jumping in too quickly. Okay, so just use your judgment on that. If we scroll down here, you'll see that I have the literature review here. You'll also see that I have a little bit of heading work going on here, meaning that I'm separating the headings in a way that makes it obvious. Now, again, this is a Chicago style. So if you're using MLA or APA, they'll look a little differently. And you can go to Purdue OWL and look up the places that say like heading and seriation, or you can look at these sample papers on APA or Chicago or MLA. You can look at any of those and it'll tell you what to do. So for example, if you're using APA, the very first one, like where I have literature review, is centered, boldface, uppercase, and lowercase, meaning like that. The second one is flush left, boldface, uppercase, and lowercase, meaning like this. And it goes on from that, right? So any headings that you have under this main heading just go in this order, depending on their level of importance. So if you have any other level 2 headings, then they'll all look like this flush left one, like that. So you'll see here I have another level 2 heading. Again, they're just giving these names. Don't get freaked out about that. The idea is that it helps me know like what that's supposed to look like when I'm ready to put a heading in there. If I end up having a level 3 heading, like I need a heading in this section, then it looks a little different, and I go back and just find out what a level 3 looks like. But most of us probably wouldn't even have those. So that is something I would like to see, some sort of separation between the sections, and you're going to have to go to you have to go to the Purdue OWL to find out like what that's supposed to look like. Okay, so use either the heading sections or go to these sample papers, and you'll see when this comes up, you'll see that these have the same types of headings. Right, here's a literature review in this one. Here's a new level 1, a level 2. And then a level 3 heading. So they had something more to say or some reason to separate more sections in this limitations of the study section, so they needed a level 3. Just kind of follow the bouncing ball with all of that. Okay. So some things that you're going to deal with are a plan for completing the research. Okay, so this doesn't have to be a super detailed plan. This is going to say like, I intend to do a survey, or I intend to do an interview with 3 different people. I intend to find experts. I intend to find, to go physically to a place and count the number of people who pass by, right? Whatever. You give me a real rough explanation of what that plan is. And then you're going to be honest about the obstacles, right? So these are the things that I expect to see. I'm going to have a hard time finding experts. I'm going to have a hard time getting permission to go and sit in some place for 2 hours while I count my people walking by, right? Like anything that you can think of at this moment, what your potential obstacles may be. Expected findings, of course, self-explanatory, what you think that you might find. what you hope to find, or what you will do if the findings don't go the way that you expect, right? And then finally, your anticipated final product rather. Again, thinking about those as, that might be a proposal to a local government, a traditional research paper, a pamphlet, a business plan, all sorts of things. I want that to be a natural extension of where that research might lead, okay? All right, so yeah, I feel like that covers everything in the research proposal. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me and let me know if you need help with that. But for now, just put in the rough draft of your literature review and kind of build around that, build those pieces. We'll have today and tomorrow to work on that, in class, so to speak. And then you'll have Wednesday and Thursday to work on that yourself. But I highly recommend do not procrastinate. Try to have this done Tuesday at the end of the day, so that you don't have to worry about this stuff while you're trying to deal with other things like on Thursday with your internship online stuff. So yeah, have that in and try to get that done as quickly as you can. And then as I finish the literature review first draft feedback, then you can use Thursday and Friday to revise anything on that you need. Okay, and I'll make sure you have time in class on Friday as well. So that's generally the plan. Today and tomorrow, try to get done the pieces of the proposal that you don't have done yet. And then by Thursday, I'll have the feedback for you so that you can begin working on the revisions to the literature review. Okay? Take care. Let me know if you need help. Bye-bye.
Freshman.
Okay, good morning, freshmen. So we're going to be looking at a short PowerPoint here. It'd be good for you to take some notes as we go. Or to come back to this video and make sure you know what's going on. We're going to continue to looking at short fiction this week, and short literature. There's some of it that's actually not fiction, but you'll understand here in a moment. And mostly we'll be looking at American literature, though we will throw in a couple things every now and then from other places. So let's get started on that, and then I'm going to have you read something and post something in the discussion board for today. So here we go. All right, so when I talk about common movements of short literature, a movement would be like an art movement, something like Romanticism or the Baroque movement or something like that. It's just a style of art that lots of people tend to take up at the same time. That happens quite a bit in art because, the same artists are growing up in the same world and they see the same changes happening in the world, and so and they get influenced by other famous artists, painters or writers or whatever the case may be, singers. And so you tend to have common styles happening throughout history. Now, again, we're looking at American literature, so we're going to look at a lot of American movements, but other movements have been happening around the world in different times. So these are not like set in stone or anything like that. The first movement we're going to look at is one that we actually studied last week. That's Native American literature. Of course, that's stuck, firmly to the American culture, so that other places around the world were dealing with other movements at the time. But in America, this was happening about 1600, year 1600 and before. Most of these were communicated orally. So if you know a little bit about history, then you know things like Beowulf, things like the Epic of Gilgamesh. All those things were communicated orally long before they were ever written down. And something like the turtle creation myth would have been the same way. These often deal with myths and legends, and they focus on nature and creation stories. And the reason of that is I think we all kind of saw the other day reading the turtle creation myth, that there would be a really strong emphasis on trying to understand the world, right? Trying to explain the things that you didn't understand. And that might be a reason that they have created things like the turtle creation myth. Which also notice that it comes from the Lakota tribe, which is a relatively small tribe amid dozens and dozens of different tribes. So, the idea is that probably each of them had their own version of the creation story, and the one that we read was just from one small group, right? But that's a pretty common attribute of Native American literature. The next thing that we're going to look at is called the Age of Enlightenment. This is, we're going to read a bit of literature from this today. This was during a time of social and religious change in America from 1600 to about 1800. This is where people believe that, personal growth was the most important thing that you could possibly do. So think about like people like Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Paine. and that included political personal growth, or spiritual personal growth, right? Trying to come closer to God. If you know a famous sermonizer named Jonathan Edwards, he was a famous pastor who did these really intricate and really kind of scary sermons that we might take a look at as well. So they did include sermons, letters, and instructions on living good lives, like how to be a good person. The pieces tended to try to teach or persuade readers. And why I wanted to point this out is because there was hardly any fiction in America during this time. There was very little. Here and there you'll find some fiction, but they were not short stories at all, not like we know them. They were called novels, right? And the novels started in Europe about the same time with artists like Voltaire and what's his name? Jonathan Swift, those kinds of people. So there was fiction being written, but it was being written in long form. And the novel means new, if you didn't happen to know that. So when this new form of fiction came out, people were calling it new fiction or novel fiction, and then it got shortened to novel. That's actually why we call it the novel coronavirus, is because the coronavirus family has been around for a long time, but this is a new version of that. So that's why it's called the novel coronavirus. But that aside, right, what we tend to find in this section is that there's hardly any short literature. So we're going to actually read something that's nonfiction from this, just to kind of give you a sense of the types of things that people were writing at the time. And we'll read something by Benjamin Franklin today from his autobiography, a short excerpt, right? The next stage that we're going to is called Romanticism. I know part of it's being blocked out there from my picture, but while I'm on this presentation screen, I can't move that. So Romanticism is around 1800 to 1865, to the end of the Civil War, essentially. And so what I want you to remember about Romanticism is it doesn't have anything to do with being romantic necessarily. It might have been, for different stories, but they're using romantic in a different way. It's more like fantasy, like imaginative, thinking about other worlds or thinking about other existences, that sort of thing. Thinking about like scary stories. So that starts to pop up here, and you can kind of see a swing. So they had this Age of Enlightenment, and then suddenly they go into this Romantic period, and they kind of want to escape reality. They don't want to focus on personal growth all the time. They want to have a little bit of experimentation, a little bit of fun, and so that's where Romanticism comes in. This is where novels and short stories become far more acceptable, right? They were treated as sort of this trashy reading before that. They still kind of are. I mean, it's something that a lot of people have a hard time understanding the value of. But this is when it started to become much more acceptable to be reading that. It made famous the inventions of genres like science fiction, horror, and the detective story. These things did not exist before Romanticism. And so these were a pretty formative time. These are huge genres now, and before that they were babies. They had to be invented. Romanticism is known for its heavy symbolism and deep meaning, right? So symbols everywhere. We'll read a couple of stories from this that are some of my favorites of all time. So it's a really cool era between about 1800 to 1865. Some representative authors were Nathaniel Hawthorne. He wrote The Scarlet Letter. Edgar Allan Poe, who I'm sure you know, and Herman Melville, who wrote Moby Dick. Next up is realism. If you notice the dates, this was about between the Civil War and the roughly the beginning of World War I. You'll also see that these dates are flexible. These don't have firm beginning and end dates. These are kind of just like being able to look back on history and say, yep, that was going on during this time, roughly. So these dates are not firm. But realism is, again, a revolt against Romanticism. It was people like, okay, we've had enough fantasy. Let's get to the true stories. Let's get to learning about real people and thinking about it that way. So this brought on a truer type of literature, and it purposely avoided Romanticism. Characters were often defined by class, wealth, materialism, and ordinary lives, right? We see some who were, very rich, and those characters were often vilified. Versus the characters who were very poor and hardworking, and this was a more traditional style of realism that people wanted to see at the time. Often they had complex ethical choices, so it wasn't like dealing with a vampire anymore or dealing with this crazy murder or something like Edgar Allan Poe might write, but instead it was just an ethical choice that they had to deal with. and those were very much more important than the plot in a lot of these stories. Some representative authors you might have heard of are Mark Twain, Frederick Douglass, the escaped slave who became very famous in the anti-slavery movement. Jack London wrote Call of the Wild, and Kate Chopin was one of the first female and first feminist artists. Next up is modernism. You can see again the dates line up pretty roughly with the end of World War I to the end of World War II, or the beginning of World War I. I'm sorry, to the end of World War II. And even though it's called modernism, this of course is not modern to us. This was modern to them at the time, but the name still stuck. Okay. This was a very scary time for a lot of Americans. So this is often written with grief, regret, and fear as literary tools. These were kind of scary, not like vampire scary, but like, are we going to be able to pay the bills kind of scary. And that's all happening here in these kinds of stories, right? People who are coming back from the war and having to deal with that kind of grief and regret, those things came up in these stories quite a bit. Writers often tried to create unique styles, so they would use things like broken grammar. They'd have non-traditional storytelling. They were kind of experimenting during this phase. And some representative authors who will read some of these: Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby, William Faulkner, Arthur Miller, Robert Frost, and Langston Hughes. We'll read some of that stuff. And finally, contemporary, and that's from 1945 to the present. We're probably in a new literary movement right now, but we just don't know that until we eventually, decades from now, look back on this time and say, yeah, that was not really contemporary anymore. So this may or may not be what we're in at the moment, but most people just agree that that's where we're at right now. So contemporary is focused on culture, society, and the obsession with media, right? We think of things like Black Mirror and that sort of thing. That would be a contemporary story because it's so obsessed with technology and media and the culture that it's defining, right? There's a wide acceptance of women and ethnic writers, right? Before 1945, that was pretty rare. Every now and then you'd have a woman writer or a black writer, and that was by far the exception and not the rule. Works are often written in this time as social protests, saying something is going wrong and these characters are dealing with it, and so I'm going to write some fiction about that so that people can understand this from a fictional perspective, but also relate it to true life. Some representative authors are Flannery O'Connell, Elie Wiesel, who wrote the Holocaust book Night, Maya Angelou, Harper Lee, who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird, Stephen King, and Tim O'Brien. So we'll read some of those authors as well. Okay, so let me escape out of this, and then we're going to go to look at what I'd like you to read today. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm going to put this in one note. This is Benjamin Franklin's plan for attaining moral perfection. This is from his autobiography. This is about 3 pages. You can see it reads pretty quickly. All of his style of spelling is in here, so like employed, you're going to have to deal with that a little bit. It's a little antiquated. But you'll also notice this, again, is an autobiography, meaning it's nonfiction. There was not, again, much fictional writing. So this is all like trying to teach others how to better themselves. So read through this and go into the Microsoft Teams discussion board for today, and then respond to the prompt, and that will be our assignment for today after you read it. Okay? Thanks so much. Let me know if you need any help or if you have any questions. Bye-bye.
Mr. Phelps's class.